Okay, let's unpack this. Have you ever put in what feels like hours studying, you know, eyes on the page, maybe even highlighting like crazy,
Wow.
only to have it all just kind of evaporate right before you need it?
Oh, absolutely.
That frustrating feel, like you're trying to fill a bucket with holes in it. You are absolutely not alone.
That describes the experience for, well, a huge number of students. And what's often happening, based on the material we've been looking at, is that the way they're studying is just incredibly inefficient.
Inefficient how?
Well, the data suggests many could be wasting as much as 80% of their study time.
80%. Wow.
Yeah, because they're using methods that just don't really work for actual retention, for remembering stuff long term.
80%. That is such a gut punch.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it resonates. You feel busy, you feel productive
Yeah.
because you're putting the time in.
Ex-
So the mission for this deep dive is to, uncover those biggest time-wasting mistakes that keep us stuck in that leaky bucket cycle, and then really pivot to the game changer, understanding how to study smarter, not just longer, using these science-backed approaches.
Exactly. It's a fundamental shift in perspective, really. It's less about the sheer volume of information you expose yourself to and much, much more about what actually sticks.
All right, let's dive into the problem then. What are these habits that are costing us so much wasted effort?
Okay, so the core issue seems to be focusing on passive consumption, just kind of taking information in instead of actively engaging with it and trying to retain it.
Right.
Our brains aren't like hard drives, you know? You can't just dump files in and expect them to stay there neatly organized. To truly learn, the brain needs to work with the information.
And the first most common culprit, the one we probably all started with.
Oh, absolutely. Highlighting and rereading, it's everywhere. You're running your marker over lines, maybe reading the chapter a second or third time. It feels like effort.
It totally feels like you're doing something right because your brain gets that little hit of familiarity. Yep, seen that word before.
Mm-hmm.
But the really eye-opening detail from our source material is that the studies show rereading gives you a retention rate as low as, what, 10%?
Yeah, around 10%. You're forgetting 90% almost immediately. It's kind of shocking.
Wow.
It's the illusion of competence, right? Your brain recognizes the words, sure, but that's totally different from truly understanding, processing, and being able to recall the information later without looking at it.
Yeah.
Think about watching your favorite movie. You can watch it dozens of times, maybe even quote some lines.
Sure.
But does that make you a filmmaker? Could you then go out and actually make that movie yourself?
Well, of course not.
Exactly. You're passively consuming. You're not practicing the actual skill of filmmaking.
Okay, mistake number 2.
Hmm.
And this one definitely speaks to the procrastinator in all of us. Cramming last minute.
Ah, yes. The all-nighter.
Fueled by questionable snacks and pure desperation.
A scenario far too many know well. That intense, forced effort right before a test. You're just trying to shove everything in at once.
But why does that fail so spectacularly for long-term learning? I mean, sometimes it feels like it works for the test itself.
Well, yeah, maybe for the immediate test, sometimes.
Yeah.
But long term, your brain essentially flags that information as temporary. It's like trying to force a lifetime's worth of belongings into a tiny closet the night before you move house.
Okay.
The brain sees you're just jamming it in for an immediate short-term need, and it basically treats it like transient data, almost like junk mail.
Junk mail, right.
There's no signal telling it to file this away in long-term memory because you haven't given it a reason to think this information is important over time.
Makes sense.
And the harsh reality pointed out in the material is that students who actually master the subjects, the ones who learn steadily over time, they consistently outperform the crammers. Not just on the next test, but throughout their academic and professional lives.
That makes a lot of sense. It's not building a lasting structure. Which I guess brings us to mistake number 3. Broadly, just studying passively.
Right. This covers a lot of ground. Just sitting and listening to a lecture without taking meaningful notes, maybe just reading a textbook without stopping to question or summarize anything.
Or watching an instructional video.
Exactly. Watching a video without actually trying the steps yourself. It's all input, very little output or engagement.
And there's a really powerful analogy for this in the material we looked at.
The swimming analogy, yeah. It's great. If you wanted to learn to swim, you wouldn't just read a stack of books about swimming or watch videos of Olympic swimmers and then just jump in the deep end expecting to glide through the water.
You'd probably sink.
You'd likely struggle, maybe even drown. You have to actually get in the water and practice. Passive studying is just reading the swimming book. Active engagement is getting in the pool.
So unless you actively do something with the information test yourself, explain it, practice applying it, it simply won't stick in a way that allows you to use it later.
Precisely. It just washes over you.
So, okay, if the common culprits are highlighting, rereading, cramming, and just generally being passive, what is this fundamental game-changing shift we need to make?
It really boils down to recognizing that the goal of studying isn't just to spend time with the material. The goal is to actually retain that material.
Right.
Some people can sit with a book for 4 hours and remember very little the next day, while someone else studies for maybe 45 minutes using different methods and retains the majority of it.
So the time spent isn't the metric, retention is.
Exactly. Retention is the key. Real, durable learning happens when your brain is challenged, when it has to work to understand, make connections between ideas, and critically, when it's forced to retrieve information from memory without any cues.
That retrieval part sounds important.
It is. The principle is clear and powerful. Retention trumps consumption. Always.
And there's a visual model that illustrates this difference in effectiveness really nicely, the learning pyramid.
Yes, the learning pyramid. It provides a really compelling look at how different learning methods stack up in terms of retention rates. At the very bottom, where retention is lowest, you find those passive methods we've just been talking about.
Like reading, which, as we said, is only around 10% retention. Pretty dismal.
Right. Followed by things like listening to lectures, maybe gets you 20%. Watching demonstrations inches up a bit, perhaps to 30%. These are all methods where you're primarily just receiving information.
But then, as you move up the pyramid towards the active methods, the effectiveness just skyrockets, doesn't it?
Absolutely. When you actively do something with the material, like practicing a concept or a skill yourself, the estimated retention jumps dramatically to about 75%.
75. Compared to 10% for just reading, that's a massive difference.
It's huge. And then at the very top of the pyramid, the method associated with the highest retention rate, around 90%.
What's that?
Teaching the concept to someone else. Ah, okay. That makes sense.
This visualization makes the message undeniable. To remember more, you absolutely have to move beyond just taking information in. You have to start actively working with it.
Okay, so this all makes intellectual sense. The big question then is, how do we actually implement this shift? What are the specific, actionable strategies we can use, like right now, to move towards this retention-focused learning?
Great question. The first core strategy is all about active recall and testing yourself. This directly fights against passive consumption because it forces your brain to actually pull information out of storage. And the material highlights some really powerful techniques for this. The first one, I think, was the Feynman technique.
Yes, a brilliant approach named after the physicist Richard Feynman. The core idea is super simple. If you can't explain something simply enough for, say, a child to understand, you don't truly grasp it yourself.
Okay, so how does it work in practice?
You take a concept you're trying to learn, pretend you're teaching it to a 5-year-old, and try explaining it in the simplest possible terms. No jargon.
Which immediately shows you where your own understanding is shaky, right?
Precisely. As you stumble or find you have to use complex terms you can't simplify, those are your knowledge gaps. So you go back to your source material, fill in those specific gaps, and then try explaining it simply again.
It's iterative.
Exactly. This cycle forces your brain to process, organize, and simplify the information, which makes retrieving it later much, much stronger.
That's such a clever way to pinpoint what you don't know. What's the second active recall technique mentioned?
Using past papers and self-quizzing. And this isn't just about practicing for an exam format, though that helps too. It's actually a potent learning strategy in itself.
How so?
Well, the material points out that high-achieving students aren't just putting in more hours necessarily. They are testing themselves much more frequently than average students.
So instead of just rereading their notes over and over,
Yeah.
they're actively trying to answer questions based on those notes without
Yeah.
looking.
Exactly. Whether it's using flashcards, working through old exam questions if you have them, or even just covering your notes and trying to summarize a section out loud, you are forcing retrieval. You're making your brain work for the information.
Okay.
There was even a fascinating study mentioned where students who tested themselves on material before they even studied it in detail ended up scoring around 50% higher later on.
Wow, even before studying it.
Yeah, it's about engaging that retrieval system proactively. It primes the brain.
Okay, so active recall is clearly foundational.
Mm.
What's the second major piece of this puzzle for effective studying?
This is spaced repetition, and it's tied directly to understanding something called the forgetting curve.
A forgetting curve sounds ominous.
Well, it just describes a natural process. We naturally forget things over time. The material points out you can forget up to 50% of what you just learned within about an hour if you don't do anything to reinforce it.
50% in an hour. That's fast.
It is. Your brain is constantly clearing out what it perceives as unused or unimportant data. It has to, otherwise it would be overwhelmed.
And cramming tries to fight that natural forgetting by just brute force, right? Shoving it all back in at the last minute.
It does, and like we said, it's really inefficient. Spaced repetition is the smart hack for this. Instead of trying to remember everything all at once or reviewing constantly, you revisit the material at increasing intervals over time.
Increasing intervals.
Yeah, the key is to review it just as you're about to forget it. That sends a powerful signal to your brain like, hey, pay attention, this is important, keep this.
Okay, and how do you know when you're about to forget?
Well, you don't need to be exact. The source material outlines a really simple, practical 3-step approach that works well for most things.
Okay, what is it?
Learn the material on day 1, obviously.
Right.
Then review it briefly on day 3. We're talking maybe just 10 minutes. A quick refresh.
Okay, day 1 learn, day 3 quick review, then what?
And then on day 7, you test yourself on it again. And crucially, you try to do this without looking at your notes first.
Ah, so you're combining spaced repetition with active recall there.
Exactly. That integrates active recall right into the spaced repetition cycle. This simple pattern, day 1, day 3, day 7, is incredibly effective at moving information from your short-term working memory into more durable long-term storage.
Okay, these techniques, active recall, spaced repetition, they sound incredibly powerful. But let's be real, the hard part is actually doing them consistently. That's where most people probably stumble, right?
Absolutely. That's a huge barrier. Procrastination kicks in, you feel overwhelmed by the amount you need to learn, you worry about burnout. Sticking with it is tough.
So how do you actually turn these into daily habits instead of just, something you try once or twice?
Yeah, so the material offers 3 really clever, practical habit hacks to make consistency much more manageable.
Okay, let's hear them. Hack number 1.
The 2-minute rule.
2 minutes.
Yeah. This is pure psychology to overcome inertia, that feeling of not wanting to start. If a study task feels huge, like I need to revise this entire chapter or I need to write this whole essay, you'll likely put it off.
Definitely.
So the rule is just commit to doing 2 minutes of the task. Just 2 minutes. Read 1 paragraph, write 1 sentence, do 1 flashcard.
And the idea is that just starting is the hardest part.
Exactly that. Once you've actually started, once you've cleared that initial hurdle and you're doing the thing, it's much, much easier to just keep going. You often find yourself thinking, well, I'm here now, might as well do a little more. 2 minutes feels so small, it's almost impossible to resist or make excuses for.
Brilliant. I like that. Okay, hack number 2.
Habit stacking.
Habit stacking. What's that?
This is about making your new study habit automatic by attaching it or stacking it onto an existing routine you already do without thinking. Well, identify a habit you always do, every day brushing your teeth, making your morning coffee, eating dinner, whatever it is. Then you stack your new small study task immediately before, or more often, immediately after that existing habit.
So an example would be?
After I brush my teeth each morning, I will review 3 flashcards. Or before I start making dinner, I will try to explain 1 concept from today's lecture out loud.
So you're basically leveraging an existing trigger in your day.
Precisely. It removes the decision point of when should I study or should I study now? It just becomes automatic. Oh, I just finished breakfast. That means it's time for my quick 5-minute concept review.
Clever. Okay, and the third hack, you mentioned avoiding burnout.
Right, the Pomodoro technique. This tackles the feeling of being overwhelmed by long study sessions. When you face like 3 hours of studying, your brain gets fatigued just thinking about it, and the task feels daunting.
Yeah, it does.
Pomodoro breaks it down into manageable, focused bursts. The classic method is 25 minutes of concentrated work on one specific thing, followed by a short 5-minute break.
Okay,
Yeah.
25 on, 5 off.
Yep. And you repeat that cycle. After maybe 4 of these Pomodoros, you take a longer break, say 15, 30 minutes.
That makes it feel much less like a marathon.
It really does. It helps you harness intense focus for short periods. It prevents that mental exhaustion. And those regular short breaks give your brain a chance to reset. It makes studying feel less like an endless slog and more like a series of achievable sprints.
Okay, so let's recap quickly. We've identified the ineffective methods, the passive highlighting, the rereading, the cramming, that purely consumptive approach.
Right. The stuff that doesn't work well.
We've grasped the fundamental shift needed focusing on retention over just consumption. We've seen the powerful evidence in the learning pyramid showing active methods are way better. And now we have concrete strategies, Active recall, using things like the Feynman technique and self-quizzing.
Yep.
Spaced repetition to work with the forgetting curve, not against it.
Crucial.
And these clever habit hacks, the 2-minute rule, habit stacking, and the Pomodoro technique to actually build consistency.
Those are definitely the science-backed tools laid out in the material, but it makes one final, really crucial point that kind of underpins all of them.
Which is?
Consistency is utterly non-negotiable.
Ah. So even the best techniques won't help if you only dust them off occasionally or right before a deadline.
Exactly. Trying to do, say, concentrated active recall for 10 hours the night before an exam still isn't going to build the same kind of durable, flexible memory as shorter, spaced out sessions using these methods consistently over weeks or months.
Right.
The hard truth, and actually it's quite freeing once you accept it, is that consistent, small, daily effort using these smarter techniques beats last-minute high-stress panic every single time. No contest.
It builds that mental muscle, that momentum, and allows those neurological connections to actually strengthen properly over time.
It saves you from years of that frustrating leaky bucket feeling, and it genuinely makes learning a more effective and honestly probably a less painful process overall.
So this deep dive really highlights that the path to better learning isn't about grinding for longer hours, using methods that just don't cut it.
Not at all.
It's about making that conscious pivot to active, retention-driven techniques. It's using strategies that force your brain to work smarter, retrieving information through active recall, spacing out your practice intelligently to strengthen memory, and building those study habits in tiny, manageable, consistent steps.
And the payoff is huge, right? You'll actually remember what you study. You'll save enormous amounts of time and frustration in the long run, and you'll perform better not just on tests, but in actually applying that knowledge later in life.
It's truly about working with your brain's natural learning processes, not fighting against them.
Exactly. And maybe the final thought to leave you with, something the sources hint at, when you consistently apply these active methods and you truly start to master material, not just pass tests, what does that deeper long-term mastery unlock for you? What possibilities open up far beyond just getting through the next exam or class? That's the bigger, more exciting question these insights really invite you to consider.